Good afternoon, everyone. Oh, good. Thank you for talking back to me. That's my favorite thing, is when I get to hear that y'all are also still awake and engaged. So, welcome to the Jackson Center this afternoon. My name is Dr. Jelena Oxley, and I direct the Jackson Family Center for Ethics and Values. We have a visiting ethicist who comes to Coastal every fall and comes to visit us for a couple of days and shares their knowledge with us. So today let me tell you about how things are going to go, and then I'll introduce our speaker. So what we do is we have the speaker to present for around 40 to 45 minutes, depending on how long they take. And then we will have at least 15 minutes for discussion afterwards. And so please take notes during the talk and get some ideas so that you can ask questions after the presentation. So let me just tell you about our speaker today. It is a pleasure for me to introduce a very old friend, Dr. Kevin Vallier. We met roughly around 20 years ago. I had just started my job here at Coastal, and he was a graduate student at University of Arizona with my former dissertation advisor, who is now his dissertation advisor, named Jerry Gauss. And Jerry is a fantastic philosopher. He's one of the best political philosophers of the last 40 years. And unfortunately, he passed away during the pandemic, and we are very excited to still be carrying on Jerry's work today, which seeks to look at how diverse people can get along and live in liberty with each other, but still have shared moral values and shared moral norms. So Kevin has had a very illustrious career over the last decade. He taught at Bowling Green University for several years before moving to the University of Toledo, where he is a professor in the constitutional, I can't remember the title of it, this is terrible, Institute for American Constitutional Thought and Leadership. There we go. That's a mouthful, isn't it? His work bridges a number of areas, including political theory, religious studies, economics, and public policy. He always has an eye for understanding and looking to see how diverse moral and political commitments can share a common world. Over the last few days, we have had a very fun time talking with, for example, the Philosophy Club, where we were talking about walls and the veil of ignorance. We had a very interesting discussion about justice and fairness. For example, whether students should be getting into college based on their SAT scores or their college essays. We had a wonderful lecture this morning in my philosophy of law class about religious exemptions. And in between all that, we've been talking about AI with students. So we've had an amazing last couple days here at Coastal. And today, we have a particularly timely topic, which is understanding the new conservative movement that is shaping American politics, including the philosophy of J.D. Vance. Kevin is going to help us to understand that movement, understand where it emerges from, and understand where it might be going. Please join me in welcoming one of my friends and one of the most engaging political philosophers I've met, Kevin Vallier.
Julie, your devotion to students and to your institution and to everyone, I'm sure you all know her kindness and her help, her acumen, and it's just been a real joy to spend some time and we're really, really grateful. Hopefully many of you or most of you have a handout. I know it can be a little odd to talk about the political philosophy of a president and vice president. It would be a little odd to give a talk on Trump's political philosophy. It's not clear he has fundamental political principles because most politicians maybe somewhat reflective, but they don't. But the interesting thing about our vice president is very much not true. He's thought a great deal about a variety of different political topics. He knows very well a variety of different intellectuals. He's very well read. And a lot of his ideas, including tensions in his ideas, are having a really profound impact on our society. In particular, in a few policy areas that I'll mention. Not just trade and immigration, but AI policy. And so I think it's really important for us to understand the ideas, because I think they're having an effect. But I also think it's important to understand the inconsistencies as well. And one thing in particular I would stress, something happens after Trump, right? And we need to be thinking about what that is. And I think that the tensions in J.D. Vance's thought are going to help us get a picture of how things might go. It's going to be, I think, some combination of these strands that I'm going to talk about today. And I'll say a little bit about why. You know, the funny thing about the way that this talk came together is, you know, I went to college at Washington University in St. Louis, and in the early 2000s in St. Louis, it was a very like religiously and intellectually rich place, and so there were like all these different seminaries, particularly different Christian denominations, and you know, I was part of this community at St. Louis University when I went to graduate school for a year there. We just argued constantly. And there was a variety of very theologically conservative Catholics, and they had this very strange view that had been common in the 19th century and medieval period. And their view was roughly this: God has established two different powers to govern the human race. There's the state, which governs the temporal order, and there's the church, which governs the spiritual order, and there's a kind of rich relationship between the two. You don't ultimately have one in charge of the other. They both have their distinct divine missions. But there's a sense in which the state should be subordinate to the church, in the sense that on matters of morality and spiritual considerations, the church should direct the state, but not in sort of more mundane matters. So it's not pure theocracy, but it's a kind of quasi-theocratic view. And you can see why, if you thought your salvation depended on belief, why you would want to have the church making sure people believe the right stuff, right? And so it had this kind of weird coherence, and I couldn't quite get it out of my mind, because it was kind of the Christian equivalent of many like ancient philosophical views that says that the state should promote what's truly good for people, right? Like today, we don't really think about things that way in the same way. But it was like this crazy little view, and like no one held it, and I just like set it aside and forgot about it in like 2005 or whatever, and I went to graduate school. And you flash forward about 10 years later, and all of a sudden, like once Trump was elected, like these ideas started to pop up online again. And instead of there being like a handful of people that were interested in these ideas, there were now thousands, and they were like all over Twitter. And so I thought, well, I thought about this. I'll throw up some blog posts or whatever. And, you know, they got some attention, and then Oxford University Press wrote to me, and they said, hey, we want to commission a book on this topic. And we want you to write it. She put together a proposal. I thought, well, I have tenure. I wasn't going to return to this stuff. So I will, you know, it's COVID, I'll write this book up, you know, like I have some time to read. And while I'm writing the book, I started in 2019, and, you know, a man slightly younger than me becomes Catholic. J.D. Vance converts, I think, in 2019. He's authored Hillbilly Elegies, up and comer from Ohio. And he doesn't identify what this group comes to be called Catholic integralists. But he's in the vicinity of this group. He knows the view, he knows the people that defend the view. He maybe thinks it's a little too utopian or whatever, but he's very sympathetic in various ways. And I thought, oh, you know, I mean, that view's false, and I'm like writing against it, whole book against it. And he runs for the Ohio Senate, and I thought, well, why would he win? This is kind of strange. But his views would be too weird for high office. And then I thought, Trump's not going to pick him. Trump would probably be in jail anyway at that point. I thought he would at some point. Trump pushes it. Trump picks him anyway. And all of a sudden, I'm getting calls from the Associated Press, New York Magazine, Religion News Service to talk to them about the ideas of the Vice President of the United States. And so it's very, very weird to go from this strange little conversation of people that I was having in 2004 to talking about these ideas. And so it's this kind of strange story that they all came together. But in Vance, actually, a lot of very strange ideas came together from these different groups that had been very much on the margins until Trump was first elected. And Trump created this massive intellectual shockwave on the right, where a lot of the standard kind of more Reaganite views had been displaced. And all of a sudden, all of these new groups and factions popped up. The integralists were only one group of them. So, you know, you have the more Protestant version of this view, sometimes called Christian nationalism. You have the Nietzscheans, like Vance pervert. You have like the straight up national conservatives, like Norman Zoni. So you just have this whole thicket of all these different little views. And there's one guy they pretty much all like. And it's Vance. He knows them all. He knows their ideas. He's read their books. He's conversed in their books. And I thought for a long time that ultimately his views were going to be in kind of this like super Catholic traditionalist group. And I thought this because in 2022 he keynoted one of these integralist conferences at Franciscan University Steubenville during his Senate campaign. They had no votes, no money. It looks like he was only there because he took the idea seriously. He headlines this with a Harvard law professor named Andrew Real, who converted to Catholicism in 2016 and was one of the leading integral savers who had exactly the view that I described to you. And I just thought this was a super odd thing. Around the same time, we go back a couple of years to 2018, this guy Patrick Mead, who was a philosopher, a political philosopher at Notre Dame, wrote this book, Why Liberalism Failed, which is a lot more famous. And in it, you know, he has a lot of really negative things to say about liberalism more broadly. But Obama thought it was a good book. And then it just blew up and it was everywhere. And so gradually within that late teens, early 2020s, you know, this view started to come together. And it was just such a strange story to end up in this place where, like, I understand this one eddy of our vice president. And of course, as someone who's focusing on this one particular kind of view, I missed the others. And the main thing I'm going to sort of press today is that there's a number of different streams of Vance's thought, and there's a tension between them. Well, one of them, of these, is what we call the Catholic or post-liberal position. But I'll come around to that in a moment, because ultimately, and what I underestimated early on was what he was doing before his conversion, which was working for Peter Thiel. You know, the founder of PayPal, the CEO of Palantir, who has been involved in financing, for instance, lots of different groups on the new right. And so I thought, oh, okay, I've kind of like underestimated this like techno-optimist figure. But then he kind of like joins up with Trump in this big way. So I was studying before he was vice president, and then he's got like this strong like populist thing. You know, and they're all actually not really fully compatible elements. And so what I'm going to do is try to bring out these different elements, but just telling the story of knowing a lot about one of them, and then really discovering the others. So we're going to look at techno-optimism, the sort of Catholic integralist or post-liberalism, and then right-wing populism. And they all have lots of consequences for immigration and trade and AI regulation. For instance, the techno-optimists tend to be very pro-immigration. They're big defenders of like H-1B visas, for instance. The Catholic integralists, some of which they want to open borders for Catholics, but not for anyone else. The Catholics doesn't go over. So, you know, you have kind of very, you know, you would think that sort of Catholic integrals or post-liberals would be very suspicious of like rapidly advancing technology, whereas the techno-optimists are, well, techno-optimists. You would think that the MAGA people would be like, for instance, hostile to AI. They don't want American jobs to be automated. But at the same time, the techno-optimists, Peter Thiel is calling people the Antichrist if they're against AI and private. So there's these different strands of thought, and Vance thinks he can combine them all. And the interesting thing about Vance is that he sees the tensions and he's spoken about them, so he has something to say about them. And I thought that was extremely interesting. He even said on Twitter, when someone raised the tension, one of the tensions I'm going to talk about today, he said, I need to write a paper about that. And I wish we didn't disagree about it as much as we do, because it's kind of been after my own heart in that regard. So I thought that was pretty interesting. So let me break down these views, and I want to start with the techno-optimism one, because I think it's the one that comes about first. So after Yale Law School, before his conversion, Vance goes to work for Thiel. And from what I can tell, I mean, he seems to have been an atheist at this point, doesn't have any clear populist sympathies, fact, when Hillbilly Elegy comes out, and I remember listening to him being interviewed at NPR, he described Trump as an opioid. On the grounds that Trump was, an opioid is not a cure, it's just a way of ignoring the problem, right? So, it wasn't just calling Trump Hitler, it was like, there's a sense in which calling someone Hitler is like, not as deep of a cut, and, very calm, very much trying to get people on the left to understand the rule of vote, what had happened. But he was kind of more in the tech community, and he followed Thiel in part because in 2011, Thiel had given a speech at Yale Law School that Vance had sort of changed his life. He said it was the most significant moment of my time at Yale. And Thiel said, "You're all chasing prestige, won't lead to happiness. Throw yourself into valuable projects to change the world." And then it was Thiel who later introduced Trump to Vance. Now, Thiel's main book, his philosophy of business, is called 0 to 1. And he doesn't like government-protected monopolies. But he also doesn't like perfect or pure competition. He says you go from 0 to 1 to change where there's no business, and then there's yours. Because you were the first person to enter the market. You were the one that disrupted everything. And I think that, in essence, that's the heart of a lot of the techno-optimism, is the belief in the goodness of creative destruction. The idea that person, that innovator who comes in and changes everything by creating a new product or a new idea, that's the person to be back. And so it's techno-optimism because it says that person who comes in and is the creative destroyer, okay, that's probably good. They've got a new idea, they're bringing in that new idea, we should probably go with that new idea. And it's very much at the heart of how Thiel runs his businesses, about how he thinks about things. I think it's also the reason he's funded all these people he doesn't agree with, in part because he's trying to create political destruction. I think he's trying to shake up the right in ways that he thinks are helpful. And I actually think, to a surprising degree, he succeeded. I think beyond probably surprised himself. Thiel donated $15 million to Vance's 2022 Senate campaign, which is staggering for a Senate race. That's not a lot for a presidential election. It's quite a lot for a Senate race. A lot of people think he's the one who got Musk to move right, that he was an influence there, encouraged Musk to buy Twitter. And what we've seen, in fact, the most shocking thing in the 2024 election is the partial realignment of Silicon Valley. I think in 2012 we all thought they're kind of like Obama center-left types. They just turned out to not probably be entirely true. Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, Mark Zuckerberg, Bezos, they had special seats at the inauguration. And it was an explicit attempt to do a coalition between populists, social conservatives, and the tech right. Right? And so that was kind of part of the idea. So you can see here, and I'm introducing them in a different order because I decided to go chronological, was the technological or the techno-optimism there at the bottom of the front page of the handout. And what's important about these ideas is, you would ask the technologists, what is a human person? And for the Silicon Valley person, they're kind of what we might have a kind of post-humanist or transhumanist perspective. That a person's kind of a digital program or kind of function. That's where you can upload yourself, your consciousness, right, to the cloud. You take it out of your body and you move it up into the cloud when you die, and that's you. It's that program thing that moves, right? And you have a very different view about the person than most people have. But I want you to hold that in place because I'm going to come back to that. But humans as programs, technology's unlimited potential. All right, so now I want to go back to the Catholic bit. The Catholic Church has historically been pretty hostile, not to technological advances, but to sort of views that celebrate kind of unbounded material progress. On the grounds that it actually misses what's distinctive about the human person and the purpose of human life, and that human beings have souls that last forever and are meant to be with God. And if we get too focused on material things, we're going to lose sight of that. Protestant countries have tended to have a better relationship with what we might call liberalism. But say in France and Italy in the 19th century, the liberals and the Catholics were very, very much at odds. I can tell the story here of exactly what happened. It's quite dramatic, actually, in lots and lots of ways. But whatever the hostility was to, say, like ordinary liberal democracy, the Catholic Church decided that they would more or less put it aside in the 1960s and the 70s. The thought was, look, we're socially conservative, we're economically more liberal, but we embrace religious liberty, democracy, constitutional rights, and kind of all of this stuff. And it seemed to be working. And so for a while, a lot of these more, I don't like to use the word reactionary very much because it's more of an insult, but they did kind of set us up. The churches sort of said, okay, we're going to embrace kind of modern institutions. And the thought of figures like Pope John Paul II was, we make peace with liberal democracy, they'll make peace with us. Right? We'll be able to form our own parties or groups or be involved in politics. We'll be able to push for restrictions on euthanasia or abortion, or to push for an expansion of family policy or universal health care, of kindness to migrants and more open immigration. The Catholic full set of Catholic political opinions does not quite fit our left-right dichotomy. But things really started to change, particularly with legalization of same-sex marriage and the sort of rapid progress in LGBT rights. Many Catholics thought that they fought a lot in American history to be accepted, and that their views on sex and gender and marriage were basically being, okay, we're back again. And a lot of younger Catholics kind of thought, well, maybe these older 19th century popes and so on, the ones who opposed liberalism, maybe they were right all along. And so you see a great souring among Catholic conservatives, young Catholic conservatives, on the whole kind of like American and liberal democratic project. So these are led by figures like Patrick Benin, the author of Why Liberalism Failed, Adrian Vermeule, the administrative law professor at Harvard Law, and a number of other figures. They say liberalism has failed, promised freedom, prosperity, human dignity, social harmony, and instead we got isolated, atomized individuals, rampant inequality, the breakdown of the family, cultural decay, and political polarization. So liberalism, as they understand it, this philosophy of radical individual autonomy, is the problem that we face in contemporary society. And it's not just contemporary progressivism, it's not just, say, John Rawls, it's John Locke, it's the left liberals, the people like Obama, and then what they call the right liberals, people like Mitt Romney, and they all kind of share these kind of same poisonous view. Humans need limits, they need structure, and they need guidance from hierarchy. They need communities, traditions, authority, and purpose. You have a kind of fixed human nature that points towards specific goods. We're not infinitely malleable or self-creating at all. Okay? The state should orient us not towards full freedom of expression, but towards the true good. The true good as the Catholic Church understands it. The idea of the state being neutral between different forms of life is a myth and a mistake. Every political order promotes some conceptions of the good, and it's better to be honest and to promote the true good. Why would you not promote the true good? Not every technological advance is an improvement. Some traditional ways are worth preserving. Technology can threaten human dignity and community, and it's very important to protect communities from technological disruption. And Vance has called himself a post-liberal. He's a Catholic post-liberal. He's described himself as a Catholic post-liberal. When Benin had his book launch of Regime Change in 2023, Vance was there, they're good buddies. Some of the intervals have pictures of him with him on their Twitter. These are buddies, right? But he also worked for Teal. What Teal and Patrick Benin have in common is a little mysterious, except that they don't like the modern left. But we can see already that there's going to be some pretty obvious, rather, not surprising tensions between them. Now let's go to populism and get the third view on the table. What is populism? Because, this is your question to know the answer to. The fundamental feature of both left and right-wing populism is the belief that there's a contrast between the interests and views of the people versus the elite. Ordinary citizens tend to be virtuous and good, and their opinions tend to be virtuous and correct, and elites are corrupt, self-serving, and out of touch. So it's like Bernie Sanders' left-wing populism, kind of the working class understands its interests better. You have the 1% that's sort of elite and out of touch. If it's Trump, it's like most Americans, people that are citizens that understand things. And then you have this globalist elites who you have to drain the swamp. So there's right-wing populism and there's left-wing populism.
different elites, right? Different people who are corrupt in different ways. Politics should ultimately serve the will of the people as a whole, and elites have rigged the system against the people. We have a very long history of populism. We have a long history of Catholic post-liberalism or techno-populism or techno-optimism in this country, exactly. I mean, there are some exceptions. But we have a long history of populism. William Jennings Bryan, Huey Long, George Wallace. But you get this economic dimension, protecting the working class from big business, cultural dimension, defending traditional values against the cosmopolitan elite, and the national dimension, put America first, and be skeptical of globalization. So, you know, Vance is hailing from rural Ohio when his book in 2016, Hillbilly Elegy, made him famous. And it was a story of white working class decline. The Rust Belt, the decline in manufacturing, the opioid crisis, family breakdown. And he initially framed it as a kind of more cultural failure, but moved towards seeing that the problems as more economic and structural. He was kind of more traditionally conservative and being a limited government guy in the late 20-teens. But he starts to embrace economic populism, saying stuff like free markets destroy my country. He blames free trade, he blames immigration, he blames corporate greed, and he blames tech monopolies, interestingly enough. So you get key themes in populism. Elites have betrayed us, right? We hear that all the time. Economic nationalism, right? Protecting workers from foreign competition. Hostility to certain big corporations that then can be broken up. And defending traditional values against the local elite. So Vance gives a super popular speech you can watch online at the National Conservatism Conference in 2021 called The Professors of the Enemy. Pretty clear that that policy is being carried out to a large extent, at least against the Ivy League right now. University train people to hate their own country. Elite education creates a class of people disconnected from ordinary Americans. We need to defund our universities and promote anti-American ideas and use the state, use powerful government to win the cultural war. If there's anything central to the new right in general, it's the sense that the old right was weak and effeminate because they were unwilling to use state power to defeat the left. And if there's anything the new right is concerned with more than anything that unites them, it's being masculine. It's winning. Okay, so we hopefully have the views on the table, right? I think we have a decent understanding of populism, Catholic post-liberalism, techno-optimism. You got a little lost, that's why I gave you the handout, the three views are there. And so we can talk a little bit about the way I see their tensions. So the first tension is between populism on the one hand and techno-optimism on the other. And it's pretty clear here, but here's the question. How can you protect American workers from creative destruction while simultaneously embracing the most disruptive technology in human history? So Vance has said, let's not regulate AI, but also we have to protect American workers and their jobs. So how can he say those two things? They seem like manifestly incompatible. If you expect anything from AI, it's going to put a lot of people out of work, right? I'm not saying that's the right prediction. I'm just saying that just seems like something that would likely happen. So the populist Vance says, American workers have been destroyed by trade and globalization, by immigration, automation, corporate greed. We have to protect workers from these forces. We use tariffs, immigration restrictions, antitrust to slow down creative destruction. But the techno-optimist Vance says AI is the most transformative technology ever. It will revolutionize every industry. We should regulate it. America has to win the AI race. Creative destruction from AI is going to be progress. So the contradiction is, how do you protect workers from disruption and also accelerate the most disruptive technology ever invented? It's been the most rapidly adopted major technology ever, of any technology, right? We now have 10% of the world using ChatGPT. I think it just was commercially available for 2 or 3 years ago. So how did Vance saw this stuff, and people brought it up to him. So he tried to resolve this in March, the speech, the American Dynamism Summit. And the key claim is this: the idea that tech-forward people and the populists are somehow inevitably going to come to loggerheads is wrong. That's a quote from the speech. Here's his argument, in essence. 1, AI is going to create a lot of wealth. 2, that wealth will create new opportunities. 3, if we're smart about it, workers can benefit from that extra wealth. And they're going to need education and retraining, geographic mobility support so they can move around, tax AI companies to fund the transition, and selective immigration. If lots and lots of people from all over the world are coming here, it's going to be much harder for workers to kind of reap the benefits of the increase in productivity. So that's his argument. And I mean, not all of it's crazy, but there are some problems. Okay? So one worry is that there's a timescale mismatch. AI disruption is happening now, and it seems to be accelerating, but retraining workers takes years, and the success is very uncertain. So by the time the workers retrain, maybe AI disrupts those jobs as well. So you might say something like, let's have a compute slowdown so we can make sure workers can adjust. You won't say that. There's no evidence of them caring at all about doing that. This was very surprising to me, because here I am thinking like he's this big post-liberal, and I'll talk more about it in a minute. There's also a scale mismatch. Previous automations affect specific sectors over decades. But the worry with AI, particularly if you don't regulate it at all, is that potentially it affects every sector at once. And what's interesting is blue-collar jobs are actually less at risk than white-collar jobs. There's just not a historical precedent for this scale of disruption, right? Another problem, winners and losers from here. Where does AI concentrate wealth? Tech companies. Capital owners, high-skilled workers who can work with AI. There are worries about people being displaced. Call centers, data entry, paralegals, accounting, low-level or artwork, many of whom you might think were kind of like part of Vance's days. Also geographic concentration. It puts money in Silicon Valley, Seattle, Boston, New York City. What are people in the Rust Belt going to do? Now, there's a sort of answer to this, which is build data centers. Which, isn't crazy actually, because boy, they're building a lot of them really quickly. But telling people to just move is not really a good answer. So the real policy, what's really going on, and look, I'm not like saying we should shut AI down at all. I just think that not doing anything is maybe not the best thing to do. I don't really know what to do. So, total AI deregulation, they pull out from international AI safety agreements, they've got AI safety research in government. There's some worker protection, sort of. Oh, the tariffs protecting workers, it's not really obvious. Immigration restrictions, but most economists don't actually think those protect workers. No meaningful retraining programs, and no AI or tech company taxation for transition support. So, total capitulation. My view here is that techno-optimism is winning and populism is losing. And, I do think a lot of Trump's base may very well pay the price. So that's the first issue, this kind of economic worry, right? The tension between populism and techno-optimism. But now let's go to the deeper worry, which is what we could call the anthropological puzzle, the puzzle about what a human being is. The Catholic Church's teaching is that human beings have a kind of fixed nature with limits, that we're on a journey in this life together to come to know and love God forever. Whereas in the tech world, humans are potentially limitless programs. And it's just very, very different views. So you get two views of human nature. The Catholic post-liberal view, humans are embodied souls created by God with a specific nature and purpose. That nature has limits, the need for food, sleep, community, moral limits. Some acts are wrong by nature. Cognitive limits, we're not gods. We're not infinitely malleable and perfectible. Technology cannot change fundamentally who we are. The techno-optimist view, on the other hand, humans are information processing systems. Minds are programs running on biological hardware. In principle, it can run on any substrate, be it silicon or carbon. Mind uploading is possible. Intelligence augmentation is unlimited. We can transcend biological limits. Humans are perfectible through technology. Now, this isn't just abstract philosophy. Okay, these views that we have about the nature of the human person affects the kind of policies that we advocate in many cases. So if humans are embodied souls with limits, a fixed human nature, and not every advance is good for them, we should be cautious about technologies that disrupt human relationships with communities, that undermine family and traditional structures, that treat humans as mere resources or algorithms, which you might think AI does. I don't think it always does, but it sometimes does. And any promise to transcend human nature and to build artificial general intelligence, artificial superintelligence, you would think would be just total anathema, right? You want to protect human dignity, the bonds of community, and traditional social structures. If human beings are malleable information processors, on the other hand, you'd embrace technologies that enhance their capabilities. You wouldn't worry too much about disrupting traditional structures. After all, you've got to get to uploading and live forever or whatever. Progress means transcending biological limits and any regulations holding back human potential. And what happens is AI forces us to take sides on this question, right? Whatever you think intelligence is, set aside the question of consciousness. Obviously, these machines are more powerful than anyone thought they would be at this point. And we don't know what's going to happen. None of us know where it's going to be in 3 years. And if we have systems that can do anything that humans can do, we do have this important question about what makes humans special, right? The Catholic answer, we have immortal souls created in the divine image and intrinsic dignity. Consciousness isn't computational. These are things that make a human person distinctive. But the tech world answer is something more like there's nothing sort of fundamentally different. AI can be conscious too. And so as you get a view that's not uncommon in Silicon Valley, which is that, well, you know, it would be sad if humans cease to exist, but like that's not the end of civilization. Because if the machines are smart, then they just continue. And so if you have this view of the human person, you're going to be way more open to tech, which is one reason that Thiel is trying to stigmatize people who are opposed to AI as the Antichrist, which is some of the controversial private lectures that were released 2 weeks ago that leaked. And here's what's really fascinating about this one. This is the one that Vance has not touched, because he's philosophically Catholic post-liberal, but practically has been a tech bro, a techno-optimist. He's given speeches citing Catholic social teaching, talking about human dignity limits and traditional values. Then he gives speeches championing AI acceleration, opposes any meaningful regulation, embraces the tech elite's vision, never explains how these fit together, never addresses the anthropological conflict. Here's what's even more remarkable, and here I'll try not to get too conspiratorial. The post-liberals are also silent. From what I can see, Deneen has made no major criticism of the AI policy. I think he really doesn't want to criticize the administration. I think Hagstead was one of his students. Vermeule was written about exploring compatibility between tech and Catholic social teaching. They both had Thiel out to their universities. First Things, which is one of the big magazines, has barely covered AI policy. Their blogs or Substacks have said almost nothing. AI should horrify them. If they're being consistent, it should genuinely horrify them. The most potentially transformative technology ever could fundamentally reshape humans and nature and society, being deregulated by people who have totally different values, and they're just silent. And so here I think that the techno-optimism is winning, and the Catholic post-liberalism is losing, and it's really weird that the post-liberals don't even really seem to care. And this is one of my predictions from post-Trump, where I think that the tech right are going to be kind of in the driver's seat, even if it's behind the scenes, in various ways. Because they're already effectively on the most important issue ever won. Right? I mean, not maybe the most important issue ever, but like pretty close, right? And Silicon Valley's gotten almost all the policy they want. What's pretty interesting is that you would think, like, there's going to be some instability, right? Like, there's so much disagreements that'll crop up. And I think this is a big part of what split Musk and Trump. Was that Musk wanted H-1B visas. Trump seemed to be closer to Musk. And then we got this $100,000 policy thing, which may or may not stand. You had to cut the budget so there'd be more innovation versus deficit spend for sort of populist reasons. And so there really are tech right and populist right tensions. There really are folks concerned more with, say, having the most efficient workers here versus civic nationalism. And I think what it means is that, like, even if the techno-optimists win, there still really is a tension. It's very hard to see how you can have a coherent movement, and I mean, look, most political movements are not coherent, okay, so to be fair. But there should be a variety of tensions, and I think we should expect to see tensions between the techno-optimists, the Catholic post-liberals, and the populists. Something will ultimately have to give, and I don't really know what's going to happen. I think for a while when Musk was out, I thought Musk would kind of lose. But given like the way, for instance, the Trump administration has given way on like abortion policy and so on, they just, with the exception of the trans issue, there's just not been a lot of interest in like traditionally socially conservative topics. A lot less than you would have thought, at least, before they were elected. And there has been a lot of focus on restricting immigration, although there's actually been less, action there than I actually thought there was going to be. I thought there'd be 2 or 3 times as much in terms of deportations. But on the very most important policy issue, at least in my opinion today, the tech right has just won. And in fact, the only thing they've lost is there are people who actually tried to get into the budget bill, the last budget bill, that there would be no regulation, no state would be allowed to regulate AI at all for 10 years. No state would be able to regulate AI at all for 10 years. Now, in AI world, that's 100 years, right, in effect, right? It went down, actually, once groups like my favorite of the AI companies is Anthropic. And they testified, and they're like, nobody knows what this thing can do, it's crazy to tie everybody's hands. And so, like, why would you do that? And so, like, even Ted Cruz, who had introduced it, voted against it. It went down 99 to 1. I think it was just Tom Tilley in North Carolina who voted for it. So, once their ideas got like more of the light of day, everyone was like, oh, this is terrifying, let's not do that. But still, there's a great deal of effectiveness behind the scenes. So, what I think we're looking at is a question of who is going to end up on top. Who is going to end up telling us what our policies are going to be, who is going to end up telling us how to live, and what policy we should have if the right continues to govern. Now, look, most democratic countries, basically all of them, there's what we call in political science a thermostatic effect. Just meaning like the system kind of readjusts, eventually the people in power get thrown out, and someone new comes in. The difficulty I think the left is in right now is in particularly trying to get the liberals and the leftists on the same page in order to build successful electoral coalitions. So I have no idea who the Democratic nominee would be in 28. I don't think anyone does. I don't think literally no one. I don't even know if there's good predictions. The Democratic Party just seems like have a lot of limited leaders, or like the people with the most energetic followings seem to be the ones who are least likely to win ordinary primaries in conservative but Democratic hittable swing states, right? So I don't know what the Democrats are up to. I don't know what they're going to do. So we'll see. It doesn't seem to me to say that Vance is charismatic enough to win in 2028. I don't know. What I do know, though, is we need to think very carefully the next 3 years, because again, in the AI world, that's 30 years, right? And so the thing we need to be understanding is, like, I came into Vance thinking that the Catholic post-liberal thing was going to be in the driver's seat and there'd be some populist stuff. And then like, oh, okay, the abortion bill, fine, but no regulation on AI. So I've just been completely stunned by this, and I was very, very surprised. But I do think what we can see is that insofar as Vance's political philosophical commitments are to populism, techno-optimism, and Catholic post-liberalism, that synthesis is not going to be able to hold because of the tensions. And what that means is that the different factions are going to be at odds, and what we have to watch is who's going to be on top. And I think that there will still continue to be something like a kind of populist and somewhat like a right-wing, maybe sort of social conservative kind of like facade. But if like so much money, huge, vast amounts of money are increasingly located in Silicon Valley, and somehow a bunch of people in San Francisco decided to go Republican, there's a lot that they can control. think about all the people in the Republican Party that have been elevated to positions in the Trump administration. Many of them are people that just kind of obedient, right? They're not really people that you would expect would be able to carry a movement when he's gone, right? He does not surround himself with other strong leaders, right? It's like the closest thing to that is Musk, and then Musk is just gone, right? So what happens to the Republican Party when Trump's gone is the same question as what happens to Putin when Putin's gone. Nobody knows, all right? And so the reason that we really need to pay attention to this is to understand these different undercurrents, right? The religious conservatives, but in their kind of like more, maybe like aggressive new right form, the populists, and now this new tech right faction that, you know, did not seem politically significant before. That's, I think, ultimately the way we need to be trying to think about what a post-Trump conservatism is going to look like. Thanks.
All right, so Dr. Vallier is going to field his own questions, but I'll stand up here just to make sure that if he misses your hand, then I'll point you out. So we'll take questions. If you want to just raise your hand if you have a question, and then maybe try to say it as loudly as you can so that the rest of the audience can hear. All right, we have a question.
What kind of solution do you think Vance should go to when dealing with like the techno-optimism versus the populism and his stance on AI and how it should be?
Yeah, I mean, so I'm imagining these commitments. The fundamental problem is it's just extremely hard to predict what the consequences of AI would be. And so it seems like both the Catholic post-liberal and the populist response would be to slow things down. So it would just be to say, like, cool it on training new models, like cool it on the data centers, go 10% as fast, let's figure out what we're going to do, let's figure out how it's going to affect workers, let's figure out how it's going to affect communities, let's just slow down. And so I think that's pretty much, since you don't know what it's going to do, and if you're trying to preserve at least something of what people have, then the main thing you should be doing is trying to slow down compute and the training, the use of compute to change new models. Not that there aren't costs to that, but like the cost of losing much of what you have and disrupting traditional communities should be sufficiently salient, and you're just like, well, yeah, I mean, maybe it should be 5 years until there's GPT-6 instead of 2. So I think that's ultimately, because you don't know what it's going to do, so you've got to slow it down. Yeah. I'm not saying necessarily that's what I'm for. I'm just saying that's what I think he should say.
There's another factor, and that's the competition with China, right?
Yep.
If we don't do it, they are sure to do it.
Yep.
Correct?
Mm.
So, you know, it's one thing to talk about domestic population, also have to
Yep.
consider the competition, what that could do.
Yep. Yeah, so this is actually really interesting because it's the main and strongest argument for Silicon Valley that the tech right talks about, which is that we have to stay ahead of China. And it's certainly true that there sometimes does seem to be something of an obvious. But it's also awfully odd that Vance has not even been able to stop, or maybe how hard he's tried to stop, NVIDIA from selling chips to China. And this is something actually Anthropic has been very critical of. Their view is we don't have to beat China completely. We just have to stay consistently about 6 months ahead of them. Because like AI moves so quickly, we just have to stay ahead of them enough. So if you can slow down their chip production enough, then, you know, it's not like atom bombs. I mean, you get to hydrogen bombs and it's kind of like, okay, we can all melt each other and we'll build more of them. It's not like AI in the same way. So you would think that it would be like this nationalist thing, but then it's kind of like, well, maybe not even that. And so now it's like, okay, well, do they really mean it?
You know, like were they really serious? Oh, we got to beat China, but you know, we don't care if Jensen Huang sells a bunch of chips to them, because that would be the first thing I would go to. If I was a populist, I would just be like, we're just not exporting NVIDIA. You just can't sell chips over there. Like if that was mine, or you can sell crappy ones, or like second rate, right? And so there's not been a lot of consistency there. Actually, that's one of the things that's also surprised me tremendously, because usually you would think with Trump it would just be like, well, it's China, and so we're going to tear up China. But was it the word? It was the Wall Street taco, like Trump always chickens out, right? So like with the Chinese tariffs or whatever. So I think that, ultimately, I'm not quite understood. I think the worries, the threat that like China is going to stymie the exporting of rare earth metals, which just looked like it wanted to do. So yeah, I don't entirely understand that bit either. Now the China argument in itself is very, very interesting, because the Chinese public, is like much more pro-AI than the American public. They're much more willing to have children use AI. And it's also the case that they built a lot more energy production, and we're much worse at that. And even though we have better chips now, if they have the electrons, they're going to be in a better position in the long run. Although with AI, it's hard enough there's going to be a long run. So yeah, I think that's the complication with China. There seems to be a good argument, but oddly not the kind of consistent policy follow through that I would have. It's just very odd to me what's going on.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. What about other considerations of mutual philosophical influence between Peter Thiel and J.D. Vance that could be try and find some unity between this techno-optimist and especially the post-liberal aspect? There's been more news about philosopher Curtis Jarman, who tries to take this accelerationist stance that tries to unite like any form of anti-liberal position against liberalism as a means of, and that very much aligns with both Thiel's philosophy in business and maybe not Vance, but some of the figures that you brought to attention, Patrick Kadeen, in trying to break, I guess, against liberal agendas and things like that. So what would you?
Yeah, that is the thing that unites most of the right is beating the left. But it's when it comes time to make policy, when you beat the left, what do you do then, right? And so no, it's definitely the case that like they're very united in defeating like the woke, the globalists, or whatever. That's the only thing that holds them together as a coalition, though. In my opinion. Like it doesn't seem like there's really anything else but who they want to beat. Whereas I see the right, at least like in the 80s and the 90s, like whatever you think of the agenda, there was an agenda, right? There was a series of policies. Even in 2012, very clear, Romney had policies, right? Not the concept of policy, right? Like he had policies, right? So, I think that's been an important change, because there's much more focus on the negative. There's much more focus on winning, defeat, and much less focus on what you do when you win.
So, in my understanding of J.D. Vance's ideology here, it seems that despite being in the conservative party, there isn't actually conservative thought behind it, at least economically, because besides his ardent social conservatism, none of the Reagan-esque type things, government is the problem, not the solution, is there. So, there's a lot I wanted to say, so I'm trying to get this out. There's not a really conservative ideology behind this, and since there's a very real chance that he will be like the next president, is that the future of the party, this weird amalgamation of accelerationist, decelerationist, religious, but not economically conservative ideals? Like, is that the future of the Republican Party?
Yeah, if I'm putting myself in Vance's shoes, he would say that being free market isn't conservative, because markets bring about too much creative destruction, and then the response is like, well, what about your AI policy? So it's kind of weird, because on the one hand, he doesn't want free trade, but on the other hand,
It looks like they're fine with trading AI chips. So I don't really know what to make of it. So it seems like they're kind of free marketing on some stuff and not about others. And not like Reagan was totally consistent with what he said either, by the way. I mean, but I think that's the difficulties. They think you can kind of rip out the free market part. And there's still lots of free marketing people around. It's just they're just completely out of power. And I think a lot of them are just kind of biding their time until Trump is gone, with the thought that the remaining people are weaker. I mean, even, there are a lot of these figures, honestly, like Yarvin, for instance, that just don't seem very formidable in terms of their arguments. Not like, say, Milton Friedman back in the day or whatever, where that guy was just win arguments. So yeah, I think that's kind of where things stand right now. Is the free market faction is out of power in the party, and the question is what they can do when Trump is gone. Can they reestablish themselves? And they'll try. They mostly are housed in think tanks. And so, so we'll see. We'll see. But yeah, that faction's there. It's just been suppressed.
If you look throughout history, I feel as if most times the newer technology is always what stays, it's always what happens for the next generation or the generation after that. With AI being strong now, but only getting stronger, is it kind of people in the government know that AI is the future, they just don't want to admit it yet? Or are they know it, they just don't want to speak out against it to maybe look bad amongst the party that they associate with?
It's hard to know because one of the most remarkable things about AI is how many people are using it and not talking about it. It's not just students. And one reason I talk about it, I use it in a lot of my research, the most advanced reasoning models for very complicated problems. And other things too. And I talk about it in parts of people will talk to me about what they're doing. Because so many people are worried about this approval. And so it's kind of hard to know exactly what people are talking about. It might just be because it's kind of like seen as kind of like not kind of morally suspect at the moment, like a lot of early technology is seen. So, eventually the dam will break and everyone using it will get older and there'll be kids who never were not using it. And things will be totally different. So right now it's kind of hard to know. But the more and more economically useful it becomes, eventually we have an emperor's new clothes moment, everyone except realizes that everyone else is using it and that's it. Right. And so maybe they're just waiting for that. But like obviously Trump uses it to generate AI videos of stuff, right? Like we've seen that stuff, right? And obviously like Vance is very tech aware, with Twitter, all the memes that people were using to make of him with AI, and he knows about all that stuff. So obviously they use it. So the question is, the main reason I think people aren't talking about it is that a lot of people don't want to be attacked. And I've actually been open about it on social media for precisely this reason. I'm like, here's what I do with it. I'm really excited about this use or this model or whatever. And I get attacked a lot for it. People are just furious. But I have a very, very specific, definitive, very specific use. I don't have my students use it. I'll let them use it. But I say, yesterday, a couple of days ago, some of the best mathematicians in the world published a paper saying that they were able to make non-trivial progress on some pretty serious mathematical problems using AlphaEvolve, which is one of Google's very specially trained AI for mathematical and practical problems. And today, I'm probably going to apply to be able to use it in my own work and political company. I'm a believer that the technology can do amazing stuff. And I love being able to use it. So don't get me wrong about it. But I also think that right now there is there's stigma on people who complain about it and there's stigma on people who use it, and it's like, because nobody really knows, fully understands what it can do and what people are actually doing with it, because you can do anything with it in a certain way, so you can ask it anything.
right? And so we're just kind of in this weird situation that's kind of unprecedented because most people don't really know what other people are doing with it, even if they know that it's being used. Oh, I used AI. Well, what does that mean? Right? Like, which model did you use? Right? And so I think for me the hard thing is right now I think there's a kind of stigma on it. There's a lot of confusion about it, and so maybe one reason they're talking about it more is simply just because it just seems socially tense right now. So yeah, I don't know what's going to become of it all. But I want us to have an open conversation about it so we can sort of collectively decide, like, okay, that's not a good way to use it, that's a bad way to use it, right? And we sort of figure things out if we don't really even talk about it. But that will break down. If there are 800 million humans using ChatGPT weekly now, I don't know next year whether it'll be a billion and a half. So eventually we're all going to be starting to be more open about it. So I think that's what will happen.
All right, so technically we are out of time. So in a moment we'll thank our speaker, but will you be here for a few minutes?
Yeah.